Everyone in this room wants to keep nitrogen from leaving our farm fields. And this is particularly true in corn silage dairy systems when we put manure out in the fall when there's nothing else around to take up that nitrogen. And it's important to keep nitrogen in our system for two reasons. The first is that if we don't manage that nitrogen and it leaves the system, it gives potential to pollute our groundwater and freshwater systems, and even all the way south as to the Gulf of Mexico. The second reason is that nitrogen is a really important fertilizer. We think of it as a fertilizer, and it's also a costly fertilizer, and it's important for future crop growth. Luckily, we have a great tool to keep nitrogen in our system in a rye cover crop. Rye is great because we can plant it in the fall right when we're applying that nitrogen from manure. It can grow a little bit, persist through the winter, and then continue to grow again in the spring before we terminate it. And so it's storing that extra nitrogen in its biomass, in its plant tissue. But remember that second point, we also want to keep that nitrogen for our next crop. So what happens to all that nitrogen that we've accumulated in our rye biomass when that farmer's ready to kill it ahead of the next corn crop? Do we get that nitrogen back? If so, where does it go? And when do we get it back? To understand where nitrogen goes after we kill cereal rye as it's decomposing, I fed the rye a fertilizer that gave it a unique chemical signal that allowed me to trace just the nitrogen from the rye into the soil and into the next corn silage crop. And it turns out rye is really good at keeping that nitrogen in the system. It's really good at holding on to it. At silage harvest, we found some of the nitrogen from the rye went into the next corn silage plant. Some of it ended up in a small, fast-cycling organic matter pool. But what's really exciting to me is that the majority of it ended up in a relatively stable organic matter pool that's mineral associated, which we can think of as building a reserve of nutrients in the soil for future plants. So for farmers, what does this mean? This means rye does mitigate that downstream nitrogen pollution that we're worried about. And while most is not used by the current year corn, a small amount is, it's going to building soil fertility with stable reservoirs of soil nitrogen.